Reports are emerging that a rift is widening amid growing tension between Prince Harry and King Charles.
The palace did not need thunder to feel shaken. One decision, delivered behind closed doors, changed the temperature of the monarchy in an instant. Charles stood between Harry and the one appeal he believed might restore his place, while Anne's hidden documents turned a private plea into a royal emergency. And when the answer came, it was not hesitation. It was a block. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles did not rush the words. He let the silence gather first, because silence inside the monarchy, the royal system of family duty, public service, and inherited authority, can be louder than any public statement. Harry had entered that room, carrying hope like a wound he refused to show. The appeal, meaning his formal private request to regain limited royal standing, access, and family recognition, was supposed to be his bridge back. But Anne had brought something stronger than emotion. She had brought a protected file, a hidden set of documents that changed the meaning of everything the Duke was asking for. Harry believed blood would still matter. He believed his father, behind closed doors, might separate the son from the headlines, the man from the controversy, the memory from the damage. But Charles sat there as the king first, and that difference cut through the room like a verdict before the verdict even came. The monarch looked at the pages Anne had guarded, and the Princess Royal watched him with restrained pain, knowing she had forced him toward the answer no parent wanted to give. She had not brought those documents to humiliate Harry. She had brought them because the appeal was no longer just personal. It touched royal authority, family trust, and the fragile public legitimacy that held the crown upright. Charles finally set the file down. That small movement ended the hope Harry had carried into the room. The king told him the appeal could not proceed beyond that chamber, not because the family felt nothing, but because the crown could not rebuild trust by ignoring why it had broken. Harry's expression changed, not with anger at first, but with disbelief, as if the door he had imagined opening had vanished in front of him. Anne stayed still, yet her silence carried its own confession. The documents had spoken before anyone else dared. The refusal was devastating, but it was only the beginning. What truly shook the room was not that Charles blocked Harry. It was what Anne's hidden documents revealed about why the appeal could never be accepted. And to understand why Charles chose the crown over his son, in that single devastating moment, the people inside the room must first be understood. This was never just about paperwork. It was about a father who still remembered the boy behind the public wounds, a son who still believed one appeal could undo years of exile, and a sister who understood the monarchy well enough to know mercy could become weakness. Charles, Harry, and Anne entered this crisis carrying different griefs, and none of them could escape the weight of the same name. Charles felt the pull before anyone spoke. He knew the appeal was not only a request, it was a test of whether family pain could bend royal duty. Harry sat opposite him with quiet desperation, trying to appear steady, but the Duke carried the ache of a man who believed the royal story had locked him outside too soon. The Duke, in simple terms, is a royal title given to a senior male member of the family. And here, it mattered, because Harry was asking to be treated not as a stranger, but as someone still tied to the heart of the crown. That was why the moment cut so deeply. He was not asking for comfort alone. He was asking for recognition. Anne understood the danger before Charles allowed himself to name it. The Princess Royal had carried the file because the monarchy, the inherited system of crown, duty, and public trust, could not survive decisions made only from guilt. Her documents were not just old letters. They were notes, warnings, and private decisions kept away from the wider family because they showed how fragile Harry's return could become if emotion replaced structure. Anne felt the cold burden of being the one who brought them forward, and she knew Harry would see her as the person who closed the door. Charles avoided Harry's eyes at first, and that silence betrayed him. The king thought he was buying time, but Harry mistook it for doubt, for a small crack where hope might still enter. Then one page turned, One aide saw Charles's hand tighten around the folder, and the room changed. Anne noticed it too. She did not speak, but she knew the monarch had reached the page that made mercy impossible. Harry waited for his father. Charles waited for the strength to stop being only a father. Anne waited for the blowback she knew would come. And in that painful triangle, the truth became sharper than any accusation. Each of them loved the family in a different way, and each believed that love demanded a different sacrifice. The emotional stakes were now clear, but the question became darker. What happened before this appeal that made Anne hide the documents in the first place? Because long before Harry stood before Charles with hope in his voice, one forgotten royal moment had already set the trap. Every royal crisis has a beginning that looks harmless at first. A ceremony, a smile, a private exchange after the cameras move away. But this one began with a moment Anne never forgot. The Windsor Remembrance Reception, where Harry made a quiet request that shifted from personal longing into institutional danger. It was the moment she later marked as the point of no return. Anne remembered the exact weight of that conversation because it did not sound dangerous at first. Harry spoke softly, almost carefully, asking whether a restored ceremonial role could be considered for him in connection with family military honors. A ceremonial role means a symbolic royal duty at public events, often linked to service, memory, or national tradition, and this one mattered because military honors carried deep emotional meaning for the Duke. Harry framed it as dignity. He framed it as healing. He wanted a path back that did not feel like surrender. Anne heard the pain beneath his words, but she also heard the risk. The Princess Royal understood that reconciliation, in royal terms, could not simply mean returning to selected moments of honor while avoiding the full weight of responsibility. That was why she later documented the exchange in a private written account, a documented record meant to preserve what was said and why it mattered. Harry had not shouted, he had not demanded, yet the request still crossed a line in her mind, because it asked the monarchy to separate symbol from service, memory from duty, and family love from public trust. Anne wrote the first note with sadness, not triumph. She knew Harry wanted to feel seen. She knew the Duke still carried old wounds from being pushed away from the center of the royal story. But she also knew that if he returned through one emotional doorway, others inside the family might be forced to choose sides. Her handwritten warning was blunt. Partial restoration could divide the monarchy into emotional camps. One side would call it mercy, another would call it weakness, and the crown would be trapped between both. Charles appeared on the second page like a shadow over the whole crisis. Anne recorded that the king had already shown reluctance to confront the question directly, delaying the painful answer because he hoped time would soften it. But time did not soften it. Time sharpened it. By avoiding the issue, the monarch allowed hope to grow where judgment was already forming. That was why the Windsor Remembrance Reception stopped being a memory. When those pages finally reached Charles, the old conversation turned into evidence, and evidence changed everything. And once evidence replaced emotion, the next meeting could no longer be a family conversation. It became a confrontation. The room was quiet enough for every breath to feel dangerous. Harry stood with the tension of a man trying not to plead. Charles sat with the stillness of someone who had already decided, and Anne remained near the file that had changed everything. Then Harry asked one final time for his appeal to be heard, and Charles answered in a voice that carried both command and heartbreak. Harry did not ask like a man chasing power. He asked like a son trying to prove he still belonged somewhere inside the family he had lost. The appeal meant his formal request for limited royal standing, access, and recognition. And that mattered, because it was not only about ceremonies or titles. It was about whether the monarchy could reopen a door once trust had already been damaged. Charles understood that difference. The king also understood that if he softened now, the crown might look guided by private guilt instead of public duty. Anne kept her hand close to the hidden file. The Princess Royal knew the documents, meaning the written records, warnings, and private notes she had preserved, had already done what no speech could do. They had turned Harry's plea into a test of royal control. She looked at the Duke and saw the hurt behind his restraint, but she also saw the danger of letting pain rewrite the rules. Her burden was cruel. She had to protect the monarchy from a decision that would make everyone suffer in a different way. Charles set his pen down before answering. That tiny pause wounded Harry more than a shout would have, because the Duke knew then that his father was not searching for words. He was gathering the strength to say them. Anne opened the file and read one decisive passage from her documented account, a private written record of the earlier warning that partial restoration could divide the family into rival emotional camps. The words landed hard. Harry's face changed. His hope did not disappear slowly. It broke. Charles finally spoke with the cold mercy of a man trapped by his own duty. The appeal could not proceed, he said, because royal duties could not be reopened without restored royal trust. Harry stared at him, as if the sentence had crossed a line no family should ever cross. Anne remained still, but the Princess Royal understood the impact. The block was no longer private doubt. It was official inside that room. The confrontation had ended, but the power behind it had not. Charles may have spoken the final words, but the machinery behind those words had already begun moving. A royal decision rarely belongs to one voice alone. Behind Charles's refusal stood years of counsel, family warnings, constitutional caution, and Anne's unwavering belief that the monarchy could not survive emotional exceptions disguised as reconciliation. Yet power in this moment did not feel grand. It felt painfully human. A king staring at a page, realizing the crown had left him with no gentle answer. Charles knew the authority was his, but the burden was not his alone. His position as king meant he held the final right to approve or block royal access. And that mattered because Harry's appeal was no longer only about one wounded son. It was about what future royal disputes could demand if the crown opened a door without restoring trust first. Anne's documents gave the monarch something emotion could not give him, a reason strong enough to survive the anger that would follow. The Princess Royal had not created the refusal. She had made it impossible to ignore. Anne felt no victory as the decision hardened around the room. She had spent a lifetime understanding that duty often hurts the person who carries it, and now she was carrying blame Harry would never easily forgive. The file, meaning the collected notes, warnings, and private records tied to his appeal, showed how partial restoration could confuse public duty with family sympathy. If the Duke was allowed to return for selected honors while standing outside full royal responsibility, the palace feared every future wound could become a future claim. That was the dangerous precedent. That was why Charles could not treat the plea as private pain alone. A senior advisor later confirmed in a documented palace account that once Anne's papers surfaced, approving Harry's request became impossible to defend. That confirmation did not make Charles feel stronger. It made him feel more alone. The king could block the appeal with one sentence, but no sentence could protect him from the look on his son's face. He knew Harry would hear rejection. He knew the Duke would not hear constitutional caution. He would hear a father choosing distance. Charles turned another page and saw the older warnings written in colder language than any family should ever need. Anne watched him absorb them, and the Princess Royal understood the silent shift. The refusal was no longer a painful option. It was the only safe path left. Power had spoken quietly, but pain was waiting loudly. The decision had been made with control, but what came next was raw, immediate, and impossible to contain. The first sign of fallout was not shouting, it was silence. Harry did not argue at once. Charles did not repeat himself. Anne closed the file with a careful hand, as if even the sound of paper could bruise the room. The appeal had been blocked, but the damage was still unfolding, moving from face to face before anyone dared to name what had just been lost. Harry looked stunned first, then wounded. The Duke understood that his appeal was now frozen, meaning it could not move into formal royal consideration or reach the next stage of palace review. That mattered because the request had been his final serious attempt to regain limited recognition inside the family structure. It also mattered because a frozen appeal is not a delay, it is a wall. Charles had not asked for more time. The king had not promised another conversation. He had stopped it before it could become a wider royal question. Anne watched the realization settle over Harry, and the Princess Royal did not look away. She knew the documents had changed his future inside the palace, but she also knew why they had to surface. Palace aides began preparing a controlled internal response. A careful message meant to keep the crisis from spreading through every corridor at once. That response mattered, because silence outside the room could not mean confusion inside it. The monarchy needed one line, one position, one decision. But the family needed something harder. It needed to survive the pain that decision had released. Harry left without the answer he came for. The Duke did not slam the door, and that restraint made the moment heavier. Charles stayed seated after he was gone, unable to rise for several seconds, because the personal cost had finally landed. The monarch had blocked an appeal, yes, but he had also watched hope leave his son's face. That was the wound no advisor could manage. Anne then spoke quietly to Charles, and her words came from a private documented account, later preserved in the same file. She told the king the papers were never meant to punish Harry. They were meant to stop a mistake no one could undo. Then came the alarm. One page was missing. Not misplaced. Missing. And that single absence changed the room again, because it could reveal who else knew about the appeal before Charles acted. The fallout no longer belonged only to the blocked request. It now carried a second danger, quieter and sharper. And when the palace machinery finally stepped back, father and son were left with the one conversation neither could avoid. When the formal words ended, something more painful began. Charles and Harry stood alone. No aides, no documents, no protective language of duty to hide behind. For the first time that day, the king was simply a father facing the son he had refused. And Harry, stripped of argument and appeal, had to ask the one question that hurt more than the decision itself. Harry did not raise his voice. That made the question worse. He asked Charles whether the block had come because of Anne's documents, or because his father no longer trusted him. The word trust sat between them like a final test. A royal appeal, in plain terms, is a formal request for recognition, access, or position inside the monarchy, and Harry now understood his request had failed at the deepest level. It had not failed because the language was wrong. It had failed because the bond behind it was broken. Charles answered with controlled sorrow. The king told Harry that trust could not be restored through a title, a role, or one desperate appeal. A title is the formal name of royal rank, and in this moment it mattered, because the Duke was not only asking for a name beside his own, he was asking for that name to carry meaning again. Charles wanted his son to understand that the crown could not pretend repair had happened simply because the family wanted peace. The monarchy needed trust to be seen, not just promised. Harry heard the answer, and for a moment, the anger left him. The Duke saw something colder than punishment in his father's words. He saw a boundary, Charles admitted, through a private recorded conversation preserved later in palace notes, that he had delayed the decision because part of him wanted Harry's return to be easier than duty allowed. The monarch had hoped time might soften the choice. Instead, time had made the truth harder. Charles did not blame Anne in that moment. Harry did not forgive her either. But both men understood something painful. The Princess Royal had exposed what already existed. She had not created the broken trust. She had forced the family to stop walking around it. The private wound settled there, not healed, but named. Harry finally understood the refusal was not just a punishment. It was the line Charles believed the crown had to survive. By morning, what began as a closed-door family crisis had become a public reckoning with one image no one could ignore. The public did not see the room, but it felt the rupture. By sunrise, the story had escaped palace silence and entered the national bloodstream. The most striking image came from outside Buckingham Palace, where a small crowd gathered near the gates, as one newspaper front page declared, "Charles says no." In 3 words, Britain understood the emotional weight of a family divided by duty. Charles read the headline in silence. The king knew the palace statement had been written to sound controlled, but no careful sentence could soften what the world now understood. The statement, meaning the official message released to confirm a royal decision, said Harry's appeal would not move forward after a private royal review. A private royal review is an internal examination of a family request before it reaches wider formal approval, and this mattered because the Duke's request had been stopped before it could become a public royal process. That made the decision feel final. It also made it feel personal. Harry watched the coverage with disbelief. The Duke had entered the crisis hoping to be heard as a son, but the morning turned his pain into a national headline. Broadcasters spoke quickly. Commentators debated duty, forgiveness, loyalty, and the limits of royal return. One morning presenter described the crisis as the clearest sign yet that blood alone no longer guarantees royal belonging, according to a recorded broadcast summary later circulated among palace aides. Harry heard those words and understood the damage. His final attempt had become a symbol, and symbols are harder to take back than private words. Charles felt that same truth from the other side. The monarch had made the decision behind closed doors. Yet now every silence, every page, every refusal had been pulled into public judgment. Outside Buckingham Palace, some people held signs calling for reconciliation, while others insisted the crown had to protect itself. That divided crowd mattered because it showed the monarchy's deepest problem. The public did not simply want kindness, it wanted certainty. It wanted to know whether royal duty still meant something when family pain became unbearable. Harry saw rejection. Charles saw duty. The crowd saw a monarchy forced to choose. And somewhere behind the noise, Anne's hidden documents remained the quiet force beneath it all. The unseen proof that had pushed the king toward the answer Britain was now arguing over. Public reaction sharpened the stakes, but it did not own the truth. When the noise faded, one verdict remained inside the monarchy: painful, final, and impossible to reverse. In the end, the monarchy did not collapse under the weight of the decision. It hardened. Charles's refusal became more than a blocked appeal. It became a statement about what the crown would and would not forgive without trust. Harry left with pain, Anne remained with the burden of proof, and Charles carried the heaviest truth of all: love had not been enough. Charles understood the finality before anyone else said it aloud. The appeal was closed inside the royal family's internal order, meaning the private structure of decisions, access, and authority that guides who may return to official royal life. That mattered because Harry's request had not simply been paused. It had been marked as finished. The Duke had lost more than a chance at restored standing. He had lost the belief that family pain alone could reopen a royal door. And for Charles, that truth carried no comfort, because the king knew the son he refused would remember the refusal longer than the reasons behind it. Anne's hidden documents became the turning point no one could undo. The Princess Royal had not destroyed Harry's appeal. She had exposed why it had already failed beneath the surface. Her file, meaning the written record of warnings, notes, and private judgments, forced the monarchy to choose structure over sentiment. That mattered, because the crown cannot survive if every broken bond becomes a special exception. It also mattered because trust, once damaged in public, cannot be repaired by a private wish. Anne carried that truth like a burden, not a trophy. Harry's defeat was emotional before it was procedural. The Duke finally understood that the family door and the royal door were no longer the same. One might still hold memory, grief, and blood. The other demanded trust, discipline, and accountability. Charles accepted the same painful division from the opposite side. The monarch could love his son and still block the appeal. He could remember the boy and still refuse the man's request. That was the cruelty of the crown. It did not erase love. It forced love to stand behind duty. The true revelation was painfully simple. Return was possible only through restored trust, not through pressure, memory, title, or bloodline alone. Charles chose the survival of the crown over the comfort of reconciliation. Harry faced the cost of broken trust. Anne became the guardian of a truth no one else wanted to hold. There was no further door to open, no hidden escape left behind the palace walls, only the final understanding that the crown had spoken, and this time, the family had to live with it. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.